Hi, welcome to Speak Up for Our Planet. We're glad that you found us. All of our videos are of experts talking about what they're doing to save the planet and how you can help too. You might like to watch the videos live and ask the expert questions. In that case, just visit our website and click Join Us. Hope to see you soon.
Well, welcome everyone to our Speak Up for Our Planet talk on carbon conscious holidays. And a really big thank you to the SRAG, that's the Environment Sustainability Rotary Action Team, for those that aren't aware of it, for inviting us to join you for this meeting tonight. We much appreciate it. If this is the first time you've been at a Speak Up meeting, a warm welcome to you. Speak Up is run by three of us. There's myself, there's Jane and Sarah, who are going to give you a wave now that I can see them on my screen. And what our purpose in starting Speak Up was to answer the question, what can I, the individual, specifically do to lower my carbon and my environmental impact, or to put it a different way, how can I live more sustainably? And that was our objective. And we've been running these talks now for over 3 years, and we have a library of past talks that you can access. And we have speakers on topics from EVs, home heating, through other transport. We've covered things like food waste, financial choices, what we do with our pensions, and then, of course, the all important stuff we buy, which includes travel and holidays. So tonight we're turning our attention to holiday travel and the low carbon alternatives of trains and ferries. And we're going to ask, do we book them and use them? Now, as mentioned by Mohammed, we're going to record the events, but it's the actual talk itself that will be on the YouTube recording. But if you don't want to appear, please turn your video off. I'm delighted to welcome tonight two speakers for you. They're from Byway Travel. Now, can I ask my two speakers to unmute themselves so that they're ready to go? Thank you. And hopefully they will be on your screens with their orange backgrounds, but as they get talking, they most certainly were. Tonight, our format is slightly different in that we are going to have a Q&A format. And the first 15-20 minutes, I'll be asking our speakers some questions, and they're designed to get the conversation going. And after about that 15-20 minutes, we're throwing questions open to you, the audience. So we ask you to put your questions in. Anytime you think of a question that you want, please put it in the chat. Please don't unmute and ask your question. We're asking you to put it in the chat, please. And what happens is Jane and I curate the questions a little bit and ask our speakers, so we're making sure that we don't keep asking the same question over in different ways. We'll try to get through as many of your questions as we can, but if we have more outstanding at the end of the event, then our speakers, Sean Fail and Yanis Barr, are very happy to take your questions. So just take a note of their email, which I'm going to ask Jane if she could pop their email addresses for their work emails into the chat now. They are very happy that you contact them directly and they'll answer your questions. So without any more ado, I'm going to turn us now to Yanis and Sean. I'd like to start, I think, by knowing a little bit more about Byway Travel. How did it get started? What was its raison d'etre, etc.? I'm going to turn to Yanis, if you would tell us a bit about Byway.
Yeah, of course. Hi, I'm Yanis. Sorry, my voice is all over the place, but we'll work with it. So yeah, Byway was founded nearly 5 years ago. This month we're celebrating 5 years by Kat, our founder. And she decided to found it because she's always loved to go on train holiday herself and loved the meticulous planning and spreadsheeting and everything that comes with doing it, but realized that most of her friends don't love doing that, and that while they'd happily go on holiday with her when she planned it all, they'd normally just opt out and end up booking a flight instead because it's easier, or appears to be easier for most people. And then she realized there might be a business model there and started off with herself and intern and another intern in tech. So there were three of them at the start of 2020, and by now there's about 50 of us, and we've got like 6 roles live, constantly hiring, and just yeah, working together to make flight-free travel much more mainstream and much more popular, and also just easier for people to access. Um, and to give you an idea, so last year we had 2,860 booked trips, and so far in 2025, we've had over 1,000 booked. So there's a lot of demand here and a lot of people who want to travel by means other than flying. Um, yeah, and we mainly do train travel, but we do also do bus and ferries. And very, very rarely we will like use cruises to go around Norway and stuff. But there's definitely a focus on trains and overland travel and just trying to do the most carbon efficient way of getting you somewhere.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we're going to hear a bit more about Byway, I think, as we chat. So let's hear a little bit more about you. I'm going to now ask Sean, what's a good day in the office for you?
Yeah, good question. I'm Sean, by the way. Nice to meet you all. I work in the customer service department for Byway. So I'm dealing with customers most of the time. I work across both sides. So it's helping people in the pre-booking stage. So I would say like a good day is quite nice when like, you help and assist people who are curious if a particular trip is possible. So I love like when, inquiries come in from people who are excited about reducing their carbon footprint. We're seeing a lot of people who are becoming more carbon conscious and are looking for alternatives to flying. Um, and we have a lot of people who, haven't traveled this way before. So, it's nice to be able to guide people through the process and helping them see how enjoyable train travel can be. Um, Equally, assisting customers whilst they're on their journey. So we do also offer like in-trip support. So we're there for people whilst they're actually on their travels through Europe and wherever. And I would say it's nice to kind of hear about people feeling more confident traveling by train, and also hearing from people who say that they would absolutely do it again and would travel this way, prefer traveling this way over flying.
Okay, thank you. And so, Yanis, you have a slightly different role. What's a good day in the office for you?
Yeah, so I joined Byway 8 months ago in ticketing. And at the time it was just me. And my job is basically to make sure we buy all the tickets for all the different trips on time and ideally as early as possible so that they don't get more expensive. So I guess a successful day for me would be managing to buy, especially those like trickier tickets to buy. So those might be sleeper trains or even Eurostars, because they are just so high in demand sometimes, and then tend to sell out. Um, and then I might also just have a few hours figuring out which train lines might be putting a whole stock of tickets on sale in the future so that we can plan around getting those tickets when they're released. So now they're a team of two, and we sometimes just have days where all we'll be doing is buying Eurostar tickets because we'll get all the Eurostar tickets that have been released that day. And then if I'm very lucky, it's a Wednesday. And on Wednesdays, we have the Interrail workshop, which I help run often with Sean. And that's an hour where we just let people who are about to go on their trips join us. And if they've got any questions about Interrail, because we do use the pass a lot, we just explain it to them. And it's kind of my only hour where I get direct contact with the people that I'm buying all these tickets for. And it's usually quite rewarding going from them being confused or a bit anxious to explaining everything and just giving them a few tips so that they end up excited for their holiday instead of feeling anxious or like apprehensive. So yeah, that would be a nice day of mine.
That's quite an interesting approach where the travel company is giving you a free webinar to make your slightly more complicated holiday if you're doing multi-center to make sure you're getting the best out of your ticket and everything. But I'm intrigued by that. Sean, what are the most popular destinations by train, do you find?
So, for the UK, a really popular one is Scotland. Scotland in general, for UK train travel is super popular. We offer like the Hogwarts route, for example. So I'm sure most people here are familiar with Harry Potter, and the iconic scene, like the route where the Hogwarts Express is going over the viaduct and stuff like that. So we get a lot of interest in trips like that. We offer the Caledonian Sleeper, so you actually get like a private sleeper cabin. You get to enjoy an overnight journey from London, up to William, or also goes all the way up to Aberdeen, for example. And then yeah, the trip is like a route which takes you over the Arch Viaduct to Malig. Um, you'll stop over in Fort William. We've also got other UK trips which lesser known, such as like Snowdon, or even like Cornwall, where there's also the Penzance sleeper trip. That one involves the night Riviera, and that's another sleeper cabin train you can take there. Europe, for example, I would say Italy. A lot of people like to book uh, we do like weekly wins, and commonly we see the trip to Italy, the Sicily sleeper train. That trip does very well. It's kind of like a way where, you've got stop-offs through Italy. You're crossing, the Strait of Messina to get to Sicily. And yeah, you can kind of, our trips do vary from like stopping at major cities, but it's also kind of, we do try to also push that kind of off the beaten path sort of journey. So we also have a concierge team that can kind of put together a more bespoke trip if you are looking for something that's, not already pre-made. Another one for Europe, final one I'll not give too many examples, I would say, is the Better Than Bernina Express. So I'm not sure if many people have heard of the Bernina Express, but we actually are a route on local trains instead. We kind of try to, offer some more flexibility. These routes have fewer tourists and have the exact same sort of stunning views. So we kind of, chat with customers, get a feel of if that's something that, they would be willing to take on, like using local trains as opposed to using the likes of the actual Bernina Express itself.
It also comes a lot cheaper than the
And
Banana Express.
yeah, we're happy to always, have a bit of back and forth with people who have a lot of questions about various trips, and we are able to adjust and tailor certain elements. Because we understand that, with train travel, it might not seem as you're not going straight from A to B. You're not just flying over everything and getting there quickly. There is a whole journey in itself, getting yourself to that destination.
Yeah, yeah. And it just makes you realize, of course, that complication, if you like, also gives you that flexibility. And I hadn't really seen that before. So thank you for that. Now, we called this carbon conscious, so we're going to have to talk about carbon. We know train travel is less carbon, but how much, and can you give us some examples of the carbon savings?
Yeah, of course. Bear with because it's a bit numbery, but we looked into an example which be London to Nice without doing a stopover. So going straight London, Paris, Paris, Nice. You're not staying in Paris or anything. And for two people, if you go by train, you're looking at about 75 kilograms of CO2. Which if you were to drive for two people would be at just over 400 kilos, and to fly would be 635. So if you just look at those numbers, driving would be about over four times the amount from getting the train, and then flying would be even more, so more than six times the amount. Then I did, to be fair, also look at four people, because if you're driving in a car and there's four of you in the car, that's a lot more efficient than two of you. But that would still, for the car, be around over 400. So you'd be 422 kilograms. So still just under three times what you need for the train, which would be 150 kilogram. And then flying would remain at six times as much because it goes up with every passenger. So we're looking at about 88% fewer emissions than flying if you go by train for that specific journey. Obviously that one's an easy one because it's point to point basically, instead of thinking of doing multiple stops on the way, which complicates things as well. But Sean did have a look at another trip if you'd like some more numbers.
Yeah, if anyone's ready for some more numbers, I looked into our Burgundy trip. I did a comparison for two people, and we found that taking the train was 85% fewer emissions than flying. These emissions are shown kind of, for all passengers when you do look on our website as well. So you are actually able to kind of map your own carbon footprint. And for the trip to Burgundy, a train was 115 kilograms of CO2, as opposed to flying would be 763 kilograms of CO2. Driving was 392 kilograms of CO2. So yeah, the train was 85% fewer emissions than
I'm interested because Jane and I, when we were setting this off, we didn't mention that our Speak Up group would probably like to go to a wine region, but I think it was very apt. So thank you for that. Where did the source of those carbon figures come from? Because people always like to know that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so how ours is calculated, sorry if this, I'll try and explain as best I can. Like with transport, we kind of take each leg, so a journey between A and B. In our database, it's then tagged with the transport provider. So we research how much CO2 is produced per person per kilometer for each of these providers. So for providers that then don't provide like statistics or report on this, we take the national average for that type of transport, regional or national trains, buses or ferries. We then calculate the distance in kilometers between the two coordinates of the leg. And then for each leg, we then multiply, distance times CO2 per passenger kilometer, and then by the amount of passengers. So it's, distance by CO2 per passenger kilometer by the amount of passengers. And then for the flights, we know we can't perfectly compare a byway trip to a similar trip by plane, as our trips are multi-stop and many people might not choose to fly between all of these stops. So instead we calculate the distance to the furthest city in the journey, and we assume that the customer would probably fly there and then fly back from there again. So we then multiply this by the CO2 for each type of flight.
Okay, right. Thank you for that. And if anybody wants to, I see there are going to be a few questions on it, but we'll come back to that.
We've got lots and lots of questions, Rosie. I don't know if you want to start in on the questions.
I'd like to just get a couple more of these first, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Ferries, how do they compare in carbon terms?
Yeah, so, oh, sorry. Already, it gets quite difficult to quantify considering each train is different. And so, for example, the Eurostar is incredibly efficient, but then National Rail is less efficient. But a figure used by Seat 61, which some of you might know, reckons you produce about 19 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometer if you're traveling on a ferry without a car. So using those numbers, it would take about 16 kilograms of CO2 for two people from Portsmouth to Bilbao versus 180 kilograms by plane. So again, significantly more efficient to go by ferry in terms of carbon. But yeah, it's hard to compare it directly to rail because rail will score anywhere. So yeah, UK National Rail score is 41 grams per kilogram, and the Eurostar is only 6 grams, so incredibly efficient.
Okay. I'm sure we're going to get asked this. I'm going to ask it for people, but isn't it a lot more expensive by train?
Yeah, so I've again compared the Nice trip. And to be a bit more fair, I've taken it from Oxford just because I don't want to assume everyone lives in London. So if we did an Oxford to Nice trip by train, you would be looking at £608 for two people. And a flight, I looked at EasyJet. If you included the travel by coach to Luton and then flying from Luton to Nice and getting the tram in and getting a suitcase each, like a little suitcase, not a big one, would be £478. So still cheaper, but only by £130. But yeah, it is still a fact that train travel is usually more expensive than flying. And that is something that we can't fix immediately, which will require a lot of lobbying and changes in current laws to adjust.
Okay. And Sean, have you got any thoughts on what do customers say about the price?
I did, yeah. I had kind of another look at the Burgundy trip that I discussed a bit earlier, and found that, if you add up all the elements and stuff, because we price a lot of our trips as well with Interrail passes, which makes it a lot more accessible, a lot more affordable. And doing a trip here, a trip that involves London to Paris, Paris to Colmar, Colmar to Dijon, to Lyon, um, Paris, London, all of that. That was £179. And I looked at, for the same day, an EasyJet flight, which was the cheapest one. That was an 8 a.m. flight. And that was 84 without luggage. So there's the 179 for the train, but then the 84 um, EasyJet flight. But then I did add on a standard hold bag for 23 kilograms, and that would be an extra £45 per person. So once you add that, the prices for this trip were actually pretty similar.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the thing is for the train, the bag is coming for the price, if you like. It's not an add-on. I think, yeah, learned that the hard way with the airplanes, as we all have. Well, I think because there's bound to be questions about how do we get the cost of train travel down, etc. I'm going to throw it open now, if that's all right with you two guys. I'm going to throw it open to the whole group. And Jane, you've been looking at the questions. Do you want to pick that up and pick up the first question from
I'll pick some up. Yeah, there's a very quick one here. What is the furthest trip you've organised?
Oh, that's a good one. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a concierge team, so they can make, more bespoke trips like that. And Ellie from our concierge team, she did a 54-day trip once, which was from Prague to Lisbon. So they lived in Prague already, and they wanted to go all the way to Lisbon. So they did a Prague to Lisbon trip over 54 days. See if I can bring it up. And yeah, they went through all sorts of various, countries. They've gone from Prague, Vienna, to Lake Bled, to Zagreb, to Split, over to Rome, even visiting the Amalfi Coast, before making their way to Florence, Venice, and then passing over into like Barcelona, Madrid.
Wow, sounds great. Actually, you've partly answered another question, which was to do with, do all of your trips necessarily start in the UK, or can you organise trips from other points? So thank you. That one has already been organised, has already been answered. Are the trips only from major cities, or does it include getting to a major hub from your home location?
Yeah, so that very much depends on you guys essentially telling us. Because if we know someone lives not in London, but will travel down to London the day before or the day of, then we can include that in the offering. Though I think most of our online self-serve trips will assume major hubs for now, just because it's so much more work to try and get every single city in the UK onto like pre-planned maps.
Sure.
What we are able to do is, if you do want to start from a specific location, or your hometown is quite, remote, we are able to kind of, the way we'd put it together is we can put the nearest major hub, but then we'd make a note ourselves of where you're actually starting, and we can secure them tickets and elements to have you start from where you want to start from.
Oh, thank you.
There's a question that came up near the beginning, and I think a lot of us would like to know about them. You mentioned sleepers in the UK and sleepers. Can you tell us what about long distance night trains, especially from Paris, and where currently they go? Where can we go overnight?
Yeah, so I started counting them and I gave up. There must be over 100 sleepers across Europe. Um, and my personal favorite is the one from Paris to Vienna. I can't remember how long it is. I think it's about 14 hours or something. So definitely enough time to sleep. And then there's genuinely just so many options. So pretty much anywhere you want to go, you probably can get a sleeper train there. Back in October, my partner and I went up to Norway, and we got a sleeper train from Stockholm all the way up to Narvik, which is like above the Arctic Circle. And that was an 18-hour sleeper train. But yeah, so from Paris you can get to places like Berlin, Vienna. Trying to think where else you can go from Paris. You can go down south in France as well. So like near the Spanish border, there's a stop there as well. So if you want to go south to the like warm part of Europe, that's possible too.
Is there a sleeper direct to Italy like there used to be? Is that still going?
I think is there Paris Venice one? I'm not sure if that one's from Paris or if it's from Germany these days.
I think
Um,
Germany now instead of Paris because I think ever since 2020 that one has
Mm.
reopened fully again. It was an option until 2020 and it's still not fully reopened that one.
Okay, right.
There's still plenty of options and we always kind of as well when we think about trips, a lot of people might kind of like to, take we always try and push kind of the idea of like a slow travel in a way and kind of, enjoy the journey as you go, but we understand that it takes a lot more time. So we can always do route getting you somewhere and then kind of have the sleeper option as a way to get you back home. And that can obviously remove having to have all these different stops throughout the day.
Well,
It also reduces the cost. You don't have to book a hotel for the night, so that's another consideration.
Exactly.
There's a question that interests me very much here. What is the age demographic of your customers? So what kind of ages are most of your customers?
I would say honestly it is varied, but because of the fact that you need to have quite a lot of time, it is people who are like, retired. It is like there's also senior interrail passes for 60 plus where you get a discount. So we see a lot of people who are able to take advantage of that are 60 plus and have, the time to kind of do this sort of, to value the slowness as it were. A lot of people who are kind of, ticking off travel bucket lists and must-see destinations, but yeah, definitely.
surprisingly, a few weeks ago, I discovered that one of my friends' families are going, and I just so happened to be the one booking the train tickets, and I was like, "Oh my God, it's my friend from uni." So it's him, his brother, and his two parents going on a trip with us. So it's not exclusively people who are retired.
yeah, yeah. One of the questions though about Interrail, so I'll ask it now. Some of us are of a generation where Interrail was 26 and under. And I understand that's a lot of that's gone. There's all kinds of interrails. You don't have to be going between countries. There are in-country ones. And can you just give us, without sort of going through everything, give us some highlights of what you can do by Interrail then?
Yeah, I mean, the range is pretty big, as you said. First of all, anyone can go by Interrail, so there's no like age restriction. If you're yet less than 4 years old, you're lucky because you get it for free. But I'm going to assume that's no one on this call. So in which case, the options are one country passes, as you mentioned, which would mean just traveling around France, for example, or then the global passes, which is the one that we usually recommend because it means you can travel from the UK all the way to your destination and back. The only restriction with the Interrail passes is that even the global one, you're only allowed to use 2 days in your own country. Because the idea is that you're going to visit another country. You're not just using it to get cheap travel in your own home country. But yeah, so the most popular one we have is probably the 7 day global pass, which means you can travel on 7 days within 2 months' time. And that usually gets you quite far and back, and then gives you enough time to actually explore individual places.
Yeah, I would say that that pass as well, the Interrail passes are a much more affordable option than like buying individual tickets. And it also, having the pass allows you to kind of, change and amend your plans as you go. You can always decide to take a later train, and stuff like that as well without having to kind of worry about fixed schedules.
If importantly, only if they don't require reservations, because some trains, such as the Eurostar, annoyingly do require reservations.
Mm. Okay. And also things do go wrong occasionally on trains. Does the Interrail pass make it easier for you to move to almost like a different way, a different route.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the app that comes, so these days you can have the pass in an app instead of paper pass. You can still opt for paper. But the app where you have the pass in, you can put in most stations and it'll figure out a route for you. So if something's disrupted, you should be able to use the app immediately to like find a new route to get to your destination. So it's just so helpful to have the app. Like it's how I get back home. I'm from Zurich, and come back to this country because it saves me so much money using the Interrail pass.
Okay. So we've had a couple of questions about do you do solo trips? And also we've been asked about business trips. So I'll let whichever one of you wants to pick that up.
Yeah, so for solo trips, yeah, we ourselves at Byway don't charge like a single supplement or anything, so we don't charge anything extra for you traveling solo. It's just that, and even some things such as the sleeper trains might reduce their fare, um, with you traveling solo, but it's never kind of by half. And with the likes of accommodation and stuff like that, we can always kind of look for single rooms and solo use rooms to try and bring the cost down. But yeah, it is kind of always a bit gets to like the hotels and accommodation, and you might find that obviously the price where you would normally be splitting or sharing that with someone is still relatively expensive, but we're more than happy to cater to solo traveling.
Mhm. And do
And
you get many business people?
business and that. So at the minute, I'm not sure what we kind of um cap as in business, so like large groups of people going on business trips.
Or just individuals, but using the train and wanting you
We
to
have,
book it for them.
I know we have it sometimes. It's not something we've been proactively like reaching out to. I think still because we're trying to mainly promote slow travel. So it would be kind of a different philosophy to using the trains. But we do have a few like recurring customers who either don't like flying or just really, really like traveling by train. And I remember one trip up to Norway where someone was going for a conference, and so she traveled by train and it took her 2.5 days, but she got to see lots of Europe on the way up instead of just flying out.
That's nice.
Okay.
So there's an interesting question here. If somebody flies intercontinental, would you then organize carbon-friendly trips within the destination country, or is this against your principles?
No, we do actually do that. We have a fair amount of American customers as well who come
Right.
from the US. And then our philosophy as well, if we could reduce the amount of flights that they take once they're here, that's already a win. And we do also have a few people who will fly one way and then travel by train the other way. Um, and while obviously our dream is to do the full loop, even if one flight is reduced, like that is still a massive change. And it's also just maybe an easier way to get used to the idea of train travel, to know like, oh, I'm just going to do this on one way. And if I really like this next time, I'll do both ways by train.
Yeah, we try to like convince to kind of reduce the short haul flights so they can do the long haul flights, say, across from America, and then it kind of reduces the amount of short haul flights that they would have taken going from London to Paris to Rome. We kind of, as soon as they've landed in London, we'll pick up the rest of the trip and even bring them back to London if, they want to do a return to London and fly back to America from London. So it completely eliminates the short haul flights throughout Europe, and they've just got, yeah, that long, that long flight.
Okay, well, we've got one interesting question right at the beginning. Do you use the Great Railway Journeys TV as a sort of basis of a package? I mean, does train travel with Michael Portillo inspire people, I think?
I think definitely like, especially for like our blueprints and our trips that get put together, I think, yeah, the various inspiration does come from a lot of people that we should, yeah, give a bit more of a nod to and stuff like that. And even the likes of Seat 61, I'm sure people have used that or heard of that. That's kind of like our unofficial Bible. I would put it as like we do use him for a lot
I'd
of.
say he's one of our partners as well.
Okay, tell us a wee bit more because people may have heard the words seat the man on seat 61, but just give us a brief description of what he does.
John, do you want to?
Yeah, so Mark and Kat have actually become, yeah, like pretty good friends and stuff like that. And even recently, we've launched like with Mark a new sort of like interactive byway map where you are able to kind of, because he himself always puts together this big glossary index of like all the available trains and all the details you could possibly need. And we've got a little Mark bot, so that's something where you can ask him questions and that'll basically it'll spit out the answer from all his knowledge that is on his website. We've kind of condensed that. You can ask some questions and that'll give you some instant answers. And then if you need us to step in for any additional help, we're able to. And we've also got our byway maps now where you're able to kind of choose how long you want to be away for, if you've got any dates in mind, how many passengers, and then you can start filtering kind of specific locations. And the map kind of shows you the whole rail network and it'll show you kind of like, how far you can get within that set amount of days, for example. So yeah, we've been working closely with Mark to kind of, put all his knowledge into this database that helps, make these train journeys work.
Yeah.
That's an extraordinary amount of information comparing, adding yours and Seat 61's as well. That must be just extraordinary. Okay, so going back to the calculations of prices, is the train calculation based on a full train and are they usually full?
Is this the carbon one?
Yes, it's a carbon one.
Yeah.
It is the
sorry, it
train
is, yeah.
carbon calculation based on the full train.
That is a very good question, and I do not have the answer immediately, but I will check with our team and feedback to you. Oh,
Okay.
Thank you.
hand up.
So it was per passenger kilometer. So yeah, like you say, I wonder if it was, yeah, a full train or not. It's a good one.
Very good question. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So if we've got a question like that, then what we'll do is Yanis and Sean will send us the info and we can put it out in our newsletter. But also if you're really, really keen, just write to them direct and say, did you get that answer for me?
Yeah, please do.
I think there was another interesting question about the ferries, and that was a lot of the ferries, the new ferries, are what's called hybrid. Is this what all ferries are going? Are they really hybrid, and is hybrid actually better? Because I think many of us probably not aware too much about ferries.
Yeah, once again, I have to say I don't know that much about ferries. Just my gut instinct would say yes, it would be better to have hybrid ones rather than ones that are fully powered by fossil fuels. But I'm not going to say that with full confidence until I've looked it up. So yeah, I'll have to look into that because again, we mainly focus on trains and ferries are more of a supplement to the service.
Can we just ask, do you do any cruises? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so we don't do the typical cruises. We use like the Hurtigruten, which is the one in Norway, but more for like point to point travel, or like port to port travel, I should say. And we don't use the typical like cruise you would imagine, like the big one with all the slides and everything on it, because again, those actually produce so much carbon emissions that they are possibly sometimes worse than flights in how much energy they consume and also just the amount of waste that they release into the oceans. So cruises aren't really part of our offering, though I should caveat with those few exceptions where we use them to get from port to port, but they're not quite the same size and like have all the frills as the cruise you might be thinking of.
Yes, yes. I think we might be thinking about a Speak Up cruise special. Well, I think this might be our last question. Do you try and use electric taxis or similar when you pick up and transfer?
Okay, yeah. So unfortunately, we don't do transfers as standard. So you get, your transport and your accommodation and everything included, but transfers and that is separate. But the kind of beauty of the train travel is that most of the time train stations are situated in the city centre and stuff, for example. So we always kind of, discuss with the customer if they would like accommodation within walking distance from the station, or we always make sure that it's got some good public transport links, so that there's always the option to take public transport, but you are, always more than welcome to take a taxi. And then if people are really, carbon conscious, then I like the fact that, yeah, we could always, insist that there is the option to take an electric taxi and stuff like that. And it's nice to see things like that are becoming more popular and more accessible in different cities throughout Europe.
Okay, I need to check with Mohammed. Are we coming to the end of our time, or have we got any more?
Or indeed, we're at 8:15, so we can maybe just afford one observation or question, and then we need to get the floor back, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think what I'd like to do is actually do a little poll for those that are here, or perhaps if you could use your reaction things. I'd like to get a little idea of, has this, listening to this, given you something interesting, new, and perhaps something you might follow up on around train and ferry travel? So if you are a yes, could you either raise your hand or your thumb? I don't mind what signal, or just do that physically if you're on video, just to understand, as this help people to understand there's Sustainable Amersham has got loads of hands. Thank you, Sustainable Amersham. So that's great. So I've seen quite a lot of hands and gestures and things, so really appreciate that. So just to reiterate, if you want to know more, you can contact Sean and Yanis. You can also look at the manonseat61.com. That's who we were talking about. He is an absolute mine of new information. There are other providers, and we have to say that. Sorry, Yanis and Sean, but we were delighted they went for it. There's a lovely point here. There's a metro from the airport at Amersham, and it's fantastic. So thank you, Tina. But I would like to finish by saying a very, very big thank you to our two speakers tonight, Sean and Yanis. And we really appreciate them coming on, and they've done quite a lot of prep and thinking about this tonight. So whether you're on mute or not, if you could give them a big from all of us, that's greatly appreciated. And for anybody who would like to hear more, we have a Speak Up newsletter, which tells you what's coming up. And we're looking always for new speakers, new ideas, whatever you've got. So stay in touch. It's been lovely meeting some of the SRAG audience. It's been lovely seeing some of our SUFUP regulars. And to anybody who is new and isn't in either of those categories, well done you. Thank you very much.